the cabin in the woods. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. 4 friends, Ben, Maria, Emma, and Sam, had been planning the trip for months. After months of stress at work and school, they finally decided to leave behind the bustling city life for a weekend in the quiet seclusion of the woods. They'd rented a small cabin deep in the forest, far from civilization, with no distractions other than the occasional chirp of birds and the rustling of leaves. The weather was perfect as they arrived on a crisp Friday evening. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the towering trees. The cabin was rustic, but charming, nestled between the thick pines and overlooking a small lake, the perfect place to relax. "It's beautiful," Maria said, her eyes sparkling as she stepped out of the car. Emma nodded, pulling her bag from the trunk. "I can't wait to get settled. It's exactly what we needed." Ben, the unofficial leader of the group, smiled as he scanned the surrounding forest. "It's quiet, a little too quiet," he joked, but his tone had a hint of unease. "You're just nervous because you've never been away from a screen for this long," Sam teased, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. He wasn't much of a nature lover, but he was here for the adventure, and the promise of uninterrupted time with his friends. They unpacked their things and began to settle in. The cabin had a cozy feel to it, with a fireplace in the corner and large windows that framed the wooded scenery perfectly. The kitchen was small, but functional, and the rooms were simple, with wooden furniture and a rustic charm that made it feel more like a home than a vacation rental. After unpacking, they decided to take a walk by the lake before it got too dark. As they wandered along the shore, the setting sun cast long shadows through the trees. The woods were peaceful, but something about them felt off. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. "I swear, I haven't seen a single animal," Emma said, her voice a little too loud in the stillness. "Not even a bird. It's like everything's avoiding us." Ben shrugged, trying to keep things light. "Maybe they're all sleeping for the night. It's getting late." But the more they walked, the more the woods seemed to close in on them. The trees were so tall and close together that it almost felt like they were being watched. Even the lake, which should have been peaceful, had a strange, unsettling quality. The water was still, almost too still, and the edges were lined with thick reeds that seemed to whisper in the breeze. "I think we should head back," Sam said, his voice a little too strained. "This place is starting to give me the creeps." "Agreed," Maria said quickly, glancing nervously at the darkening sky. They turned back, eager to get back to the safety of the cabin, but as they reached the edge of the woods, something stopped them. A figure, half hidden in the trees, stood motionless and still. Ben squinted. "Did you see that?" he asked. Before anyone could respond, the figure vanished into the shadows. It was too quick to make out clearly, but it had the shape of a person, a tall figure with a hunched back and an odd gait. "Who the hell was that?" Maria asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Ben said, his hand gripping the strap of his backpack. "Let's just get inside, okay?" They hurried back to the cabin, their footsteps quickening as they reached the door. Sam fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, before they finally stepped inside. The cabin felt warmer now that they were inside, but the unease lingered. As they gathered around the fireplace, the night seemed to settle into an uncomfortable silence. The fire crackled and popped, casting strange shadows on the walls. No one spoke for a while. "I don't know if I'm crazy, but I swear I saw someone out there," Emma said finally, breaking the silence. "We all saw something," Maria added, her voice barely above a whisper. "What was that thing?" Ben shook his head. "We're probably just imagining things. It's a weird place." "Sure, but I think we're safe here. It's just us." But even as he said the words, a chill ran down his spine. The unease wouldn't go away, and the quiet seemed to press in on them from all sides. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, though the sense of discomfort didn't dissipate. The group sat in front of the fire, talking and laughing in an attempt to shake off the strange feeling. When they finally went to bed, the cabin felt cold and unfamiliar, as if it were holding some secret that none of them were meant to uncover. That night, Ben woke to the sound of scratching. At first, he thought it was just the wind, or perhaps the cabin settling, but the sound grew louder. It came from somewhere deep within the walls, slow and rhythmic, like something was trying to get in. Ben sat up in bed, heart pounding. He glanced at the clock, 3:03 a.m. The house was still, except for the strange noise coming from the walls. He crept out of bed and quietly made his way to the window. The forest outside was pitch black, but something caught his eye in movement near the trees. He froze. A figure was standing just outside the cabin, watching him, tall, thin, and hunched. It was almost impossible to make out in the dark, but Ben was sure it was the same figure from before. His breath caught in his throat. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. The figure just stood there, unmoving, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Ben wanted to call out, but his voice was trapped in his chest. Suddenly, the scratching stopped, and the figure turned and disappeared into the woods. Ben couldn't bring himself to wake the others immediately. His mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. Was it a person? Was it something else? The next morning, the others were awake and gathered around the breakfast table, but Ben was quiet. He hadn't told them about what he saw outside the window. He couldn't bring himself to speak the words aloud. "We should leave," Sam said suddenly, breaking the silence. "This place is wrong. I don't care if we're only a few hours in. I don't want to stay here anymore." Ben glanced around the table, noticing the same look of unease on each of their faces. Maria and Emma both nodded in agreement. They packed their things in a hurry, the morning fog hanging heavily over the forest, and without another word, they began the drive back to the city. As they reached the edge of the forest, Ben glanced out the rearview mirror. The cabin was still there, nestled in the trees, but standing just outside, watching them leave, was the figure, tall, thin, and hunched. It stood motionless, its eyes glowing faintly. And that was the last time any of them ever returned to the woods.